You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible.
Today is Veterans Day, a day when we celebrate all military who served our country. We want to thank you all for your service. We all want to look at how we take care of our vets when they return home as well. Here are some startling statistics according to the National Council of Behavioral Health. 30% of active duty and reserve military personnel deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan have a mental health condition requiring treatment. Approximately 730,000 men and women experience post-traumatic stress disorder and major depression. Less than 50% of returning veterans in need receive any mental health treatment at all. And approximately 22 veterans die by suicide every day. And lengths of deployments are associated with more emotional difficulties among military children and more mental health problems among U.S. Army wives. Joining me to talk about this is Jeremy Butler, CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Good evening, Mr. Butler. How are you?
Good evening. I'm good. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. So when we hear those statistics, it is just heart-wrenching to think that you have individuals who dedicate their lives to serving this country, and then they get back here and face so many challenges. What are we doing to really make sure that we are able to close the gap between the needs that are there and the ability for those men and women to get the services that they require in order to get better?
Yeah, unfortunately, the short answer is we're not doing nearly enough as a country, as a government, as a society, frankly. And I think part of the problem is that we're not comfortable talking about the fact that mental health is an important part of our overall physical health, and we need to be talking about it more frequently. We need to destigmatize the fact that, as your statistics showed, there's a lot of people that are out there dealing with some mental health difficulties, and we need to be able to talk about them. And then most importantly, once we talk about them, we need to be able to connect people to resources where they can get the help they need. And we're failing, I think, on both those accounts. We're starting to have the conversation. I really appreciate you furthering that by talking about this, not just today on Veterans Day, but every day of the year. We need to continue to talk about this as important a topic, not just for military and veterans, but for the entire country, because I think that's how we're going to get over this issue, is by having a nationwide conversation about the importance of discussing mental health and making sure that we've got the resources available to help treat those who need it.
Absolutely. I think it's a very astute observation that there is this special stigma that it seems that we reserve for mental health in this nation. And when you think of all that those who have served us have faced and seen, I think a lot of folks are maybe even wary about what do you say, how do you handle these situations, how do we interact, how will they perform on the job? How do we help people understand the importance of not only making sure that people get connected to the mental health services that they need, but also how to better, infuse them into society so that they aren't stigmatized just because they were brave enough to serve.
Exactly, and I think you're making a really good point there, and that's the problem, is that especially those going into the military and then during your time in service, you're looked to be a strong leader, and that's up and down the chain of command. You're expected to be tough, to be resilient, and those are the types of traits that we drive into the men and women that are serving. And then we kind of have a counterfactual attempt to, when they're on their way out, and say, okay, yeah, and by the way, if you need help, make sure you ask for it and get any help that you need. And so it's a little too late, I would say. So I think what's important is that right from the beginning, the same way we're talking about the importance of, making sure your blood pressure's in check, making sure you're going to the dentist, things like that, mental health checkups and discussions need to be a regular part of the conversation, so that we're not only having this conversation when someone is in a state of mental health crisis, but early on we can begin to catch things early, make sure that people are getting the treatment that they need. And a lot of times the mental health crisis comes from a collaboration of a bunch of events. It's not any single thing. It's dealing with economic stress, financial issues, potential homelessness, trouble finding a job and keeping a job as they transition out of the military. It's all of these factors coming together. So when we start to attack and solve those underlying issues, I think we're really going to make additional progress towards solving the mental health crisis that we're dealing with at the same time.
And I have to say, you know, it's interesting to me that politicians love to wrap themselves up in the flag. They love to all talk about how much they love the military and thank everyone for their service. But when it comes to actually voting for legislation that will require the proper appropriations of funds to be able to meet these needs, somehow they seem to fall short over and over and over again. What can we do as citizens, as viewers, as voters to make sure that we hold our elected officials accountable such that they are on the right side of the voting when it comes to actually funding those services that veterans need so much to be able to take care of these needs?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, because that really is the bottom line. Everyone says they want to support, and then when there comes with a price tag, it becomes a little bit more hesitant to do so. So there's a lot of legislation that we support, both in the Senate and the House, and work that's being done by the administration. One of the biggest pieces right now is the Commander John Scott Hannon Mental Health Care Improvement Act. It's named after a retired Navy SEAL who was served successfully for a number of years, number of combat deployments, came back home, started working to help fellow veterans, but still ultimately died of suicide because he wasn't getting the care he was needed. So what this bill and the legislation would do is would increase federal government grants to state and local organizations that connect veterans and civilians to the mental health care that they need. And that's going to be a big step in getting to this problem, because we can't just simply rely on the VA, the Veterans Affairs Administration, to do this work for us. You cited the statistic of 22 suicides per day. We see that number kind of going up and down just by a little bit, but the bottom line is it's stayed almost the same for years. So we're not making progress there. If we rely on the VA to get that number 22 down, we're never going to make it, because the underlying issue is that 14 of those 22 are outside of the VA care. And so what this bill would do is it would get money to those smaller organizations in the local community that can connect to the veterans and their family members to get them the help that they need. Similarly, the administration started it's called a Prevents Task Force in March of this year to also get at this issue. They've got grants within that, but they're not expected to take any action on making those happen until March of 2020. So again, we're just moving too slowly. So what people can do, go to iava.org. We've got updates on all of this legislation, plus all of our other priorities to help veterans. It's all bipartisan work. Every bit of legislation we support has support on both sides of the aisle. We need to hear from civilian, from military, from everyone to reach out to their members of Congress and say this is important to act on now. If we can start moving this, we're really going to make a lot of efforts, a lot of leeway in getting these issues resolved.
Absolutely. And you said iava.org?
That's right. IAVA, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, IAVA.org. We're, like I said, nonpartisan, bipartisan, nonprofit organization that we work at. We're focused on post 9/11 veterans, but really the work that we do spans the generations. Military veteran suicide is not an issue that's only affecting the post 9/11 generation. It goes all the way back to Vietnam era veterans. Everyone really within our community is suffering in one level or another. And so the work that we're doing really is going to affect all veterans and benefit everyone.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Butler.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. And so now we're going to go to our panel, starting off with Mustafa Santiago Ali, Vice President of Environmental Justice, Climate, and Community Revitalization with the National Wildlife Federation. Next to him is Pastor Shannon Wright, Baltimore mayoral candidate, and then Dr. Cleo Minago, political analyst. Oh my goodness. It's just so frustrating to hear every year the same sort of challenges that remain, but politically we seem stuck at this point of thanking people for their service, but actually not doing what we need to do as a nation to take care of those people who are there for us.
It's lip service.
Yeah.
You know, you say the words because you are grateful that somebody is out there trying to protect us, but you don't prioritize it by your actions. You know, the things that the military folks are trained to do are not things that transition well back into civilian life. So to not have vehicles in place to be able to help them to make that successful transition, that's our fault, not their fault.
Absolutely.
Over 6,000 people a year, that's a lot.
Yeah.
It is.
And it makes me wonder, and it's kind of rhetorical that I'm wondering, if the mental health system or approach in this country is even effective. One of the articles that Jackie sent us talked about a man who did go seek services, but they were inadequate, and they didn't work well for him. And I think that this might be kind of complex, but we do our work in mental health based on Jung and Freud, and those approaches are not really necessarily relevant to everybody.
Right.
And people need to expand beyond Freud and Jung in terms of being more effective at mental health provision. And I really think that the system itself is not doing well because there's disproportionate mental health problems across the board, even outside of veterans. For example, in the African American community, there's a huge disproportionate non-use of available mental health services. And Obamacare has included mental health services as part of care, I should say, as part of the Obama package, but people don't necessarily utilize it because they're not satisfied with what they're getting. So that's an issue too.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a stigma. And until we address the stigma, you know, inside of our communities, inside of communities of color, there's a stigma if you go to utilize mental health.
That's true.
And there is a stigma inside the military as well. So we're very reactionary, and we have to stop being reactionary. So why aren't we making sure that there are conversations and helping people to understand the value of mental health when we have folks who are in the military schools, when we have folks who are in ROTC, when we have folks who are going through basic training. Now, we have to also ask the question, when you go into basic training, it's about breaking you down to build you back up. But there has to be mental health conversations and access points to help people to understand that it's okay if you're dealing with a situation, if you're feeling overwhelmed. And then when you get to the back end, people would no longer be, you know, feeling the stigma if they need to reach out and they need to get help.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's the real deal.
That stigma thing, though, is so huge. And, you know, I'm thinking if you're coming from a culture where it's a culture that, you know, you have to be tough. You have to be strong. Your life depends on it, and the people around you, their lives depend on it.
Absolutely.
You know, we have to figure out a way to let people know that saying that you need help is not an indicator of weakness. I mean, how do we get that message across?
It's also an issue of language. I ran a mental health center in Los Angeles for over 15 years, and when we changed the word from mental health to well-being, and found other buzzwords that sounded less stigmatized, you will, people came running in.
Wow.
But also that had to do with how my staff was trained to engage them around the issue of mental health literacy or well-being literacy.
Right.
So because something has a stigma, I think we should realize that we should probably not use it. Instead of being mad at people or judging them for having a reaction to language, you're supposed to be in a position of care. Change the language so they can be responsive and be willing to walk through, because people know they need help. But nobody wants to be called crazy, including crazy people. I ain't crazy. You crazy?
I might be.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Well, we'll see if you sign up.
But you know,
We got to stop.
you know, and it's not just in the military.
Yeah.
A lot of
That's
the
right.
things that we see going on in our cities, a lot of these mass shootings, a lot of these, listen, mental health care or lack thereof is a problem.
Yes.
And if we don't address it, it's going to address someone we know or love.
Yeah.
Period.
Absolutely.
If it hasn't already.
47,000 people are committing suicide every year in our country, something like
That's
that.
crazy.
The numbers are crazy.
Yeah.
I thought the numbers were higher than the gentleman shared with us of folks who are actually taking their lives.
Veterans.
Yeah, the veterans who are taking their lives. So, you know, I remember when I was a kid, there was a gentleman who was in our community, and he had came back from, you know, being across, you know, and dealing with some situations when he was, you know, in service.
Right.
And he was ostracized. And people would actually, because something bad happened when he was there, and he just couldn't, you know, sort of find the space and the support to help him make that transition, and he was literally ostracized. People would, you know, say he was crazy, and they would, you know, literally not engage with him, and he would walk the streets.
Wow.
And he would walk the streets until one day folks no longer saw him, and people were wondering what happened to him, and he had taken his life.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, we can't let that happen. That sort of thing, it's really no excuse. We have to figure out a way that
Absolutely.
we don't let people fall through the cracks like that.
Especially the ones that are on the front line looking out for us.
Absolutely. No excuse.
That's not right.
Well, I hope people are listening, Avis, because it's getting worse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The mental health crisis is getting worse. And I was a keynote speaker at a mental health conference some years ago, and I remember asking the providers, who's in this room to diagnose somebody as crazy, and who in this room is not crazy? And you know, people was doing this, and these were therapists.
Wow.
They didn't know whether to raise their hand or not.
Wow.
You know, and some people go into therapy because they need therapy.
Yeah.
You know, and because they have a working relationship with mental illness, so they professionalize their personal relationship with the phenomena, and they may or may not make the best therapist.
And therapy does not mean you're crazy. It just means you need somebody to talk to.
You know, when you can admit that there's an issue, life is stressful.
Yeah.
So sometimes you need a little bit more help in terms of figuring out what are the best resources and tools for you and the people around you to be able to deal with that stress. And when you don't do that, you become stressful for everybody around you.
Absolutely.
And sometimes in a really negative way. So my grandmother used to say, prevent is better than cure.
Absolutely.
So we need to work that out.
Absolutely. So we'll continue the discussion after the break.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, it's the holiday season. This is when you think about spending time with family and friends. This is also when you count your blessings and support those less fortunate. This year, be a holiday hero and change someone's life forever. Right now, hundreds of thousands of Americans are sitting in jail without being convicted of a crime. Why? Because they lack the financial resources to pay their bail. Now think about it. If you are arrested for any minor offense, you will be taken directly to jail. If you don't have bail money, you will stay there until a court date is scheduled. That could be days, weeks, or even months. Simply put, America's bail system is broken for people of color. Freedom should be free. That's why the Ebony Foundation has partnered with the Bail Project and is sponsoring the Home by the Holiday campaign. The Bail Project has helped bail out thousands of people over the years, and with your help, they plan to get 1,000 people out of jail by New Year's Day. And that, of course, would be a great holiday gift for many families. A donation from you today can change someone's life tomorrow. Now that you know the people of color represent upwards of 90% of the jail population across the country. Now, without bail, nearly 90% of those charged with misdemeanors pled guilty. Now, however, with paid bail, less than 2% receive the jail sentence. Sometimes justice needs just us. To join the fight, you can donate $25, $50 or more to help the Ebony Foundation bring our brothers and sisters home by the holiday. To donate, go to homebytheholiday.com. That's homebytheholiday.com. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video.